We both have done this work for a number of years. We're seeing the world change probably faster than anyone imagined that change could happen. We all knew it was coming, but it's happening so quickly. My question to you is, are you optimistic about where we're going in our future? And in the panel, you said we have the ability to change, neuroplasticity that goes beyond even the brain. Do you think that we are changing fast enough to meet the needs of the world that the world is asking of us right now? That's what I'd like to know.
If you examine every paradigm, every system right now, whether it's the political system, the economic system, if you look at the religious model, if you look at the environment, you look at the educational model, you look at the medical model, all of these different paradigms are beginning to collapse. And the number one reason is because information is so readily available. The monotheistic paternal view that there was an authority figure, that was a priest, a doctor, a governor, a leader, a king that oversaw and ruled and had all the information and disseminated that information by choice or by will to people that were at one time ignorant, was a great way to control people. And then if you threw in a little guilt and a little fear, you threw in a little suffering, you threw in a little deceit or competition, you can keep people functioning pretty much as matter, as physiological bodies, matter trying to change matter. And that takes a tremendous amount of effort and energy to do. But because these systems are breaking down, I mean, Harun and I were talking about this earlier. Just think about what happened 30 years ago when you went to a doctor and she said, hey, you have this condition and you should probably try this treatment. We're going to cut out this organ, or you're going to try this therapy, or you're going to do this drug. And most people 25, 30 years ago just signed on the dotted line and they said, okay, and then there was an informed consent that said, oh, and if your gallbladder's not working, or we see something that isn't, your appendix is looking kind of bad, we'll take that out too. And oh, thank you. It was, oh, great. But if you fast forward to today and you go to a physician or a health practitioner and they give you a diagnosis, what do you do the first thing you get your diagnosis? You go home and you research it, yes? Yeah. And you read about it, and if you spend 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours or 2 days, you know as much information about that condition as your physician, and in some cases you know the alternative choices that they may not even be aware of. So you return back to your doctor and you say, hey, I want to try this treatment, I want to try this therapy. And they say, oh, that doesn't work, or I don't know anything about that. Now, I don't know about how it works in the UK, but in the United States, people are saying, really? Time to find a new doctor. I want somebody to support me in my health goals, and I want someone to inform me and advise me in a way that helps to measure what I'm doing, and I don't feel any pushback or any negativity because of the choice that I'm making. And the research shows that people who feel good about the treatments that they do heal faster. So because so many different systems are beginning to break down, I'm very optimistic, because in order for something new to happen, the old literally has to fall apart. Now, there's a caveat to that, because I believe that if things really start breaking down, there's a propensity for people to live in fear, for people to live in lack, for people to compete and try to get what they need because they live in a scarcity consciousness. Well, it's that same consciousness, it's that same energy, it's that same mentality that will propagate the same system, will reproduce the past. History will repeat itself. But all the messages that you'll hear this weekend really is about a coherent brain and a coherent heart. And my research, along with Gregg's research and a lot of other people here, will show that those are the 2 ingredients that you need to navigate through chaotic conditions in your life. And so then I was talking to a group of, I was invited in Spain to speak to the 17 ministries in the country during the crisis, and they wanted to know what they could do in order to change. So here comes this white American who's going to show up and talk about crisis in a country that's really falling apart. And so I walked out on the stage and I said, okay, there's the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Health, and they're all out there. And I say, so how are you contributing to the crisis? And then I think, I hope there's a getaway car here because I'm going to need to go. But it was an important question because it means they had, instead of looking outside of themselves, they had to look inside of themselves. And I said to them, well, how do you become supernatural? How do you begin to evoke change? It means then when there's crisis or when there's lack, that's the time to give. When there's fear and there's hostility, that's the time to show love and courage and compassion. When everybody else is judging, that's the time to show cooperation. And if we keep doing the unnatural, sooner or later we will become supernatural. And so we have to go after this change in the world from a different level of mind. We have to really begin to unify. And the ingredient that creates that unity is those elevated emotions called care and kindness and love and cooperation and wholeness. And those are the things that we should be cultivating on a moment-to-moment basis. And if you begin to tap into your own potential, into your own resources, it's going to diminish your need for things external from you. Now, all of a sudden, companies and organizations that are looking for consumerism, that's how they make a profit, are no longer going to get what they need because they're less controlled or seduced by the conditions in your environment. And so I am optimistic in a sense because I understand that what's coming down the pipe is that there will be some chaos that's created. But I'm also really excited, and I think all of us on some level have negotiated to be here. Yeah, absolutely. And I also believe that on another level, that in my experience of witnessing common people doing the uncommon, of healing themselves and changing their lives and creating miraculous experiences, that we all have the resources and the ability to be able to do that. And the conferences that I'm interested in more than any other conferences are the conferences where we get down and do it. That's where I want to be most of the time because everything else to me is dinner conversation. And I don't really feel like we're very changed. Yeah. But when you have to come up against your limitations and you get beyond some emotion that's kept you anchored to the past for 30 years and you free your body from the chains of that emotion and you begin to liberate energy and now you can see a whole new landscape in your future because you're no longer looking at it through the lens of the past and you all of a sudden no longer knee-jerk in your life emotionally and react in the same way, you give people permission to do the same. And so the way we begin to change this whole game is we start with ourselves, and as we begin to do that, we begin to allow others to do the same. So great time to be alive in history. We should never, ever, ever, ever wait for science to give us permission to do the uncommon. We should go out there and do the uncommon and do it repeatedly and have science come and study us and upgrade their laws to say, what in the world are you doing? That's true science to me.
So other than that, not much going on, huh? No, I agree with everything Joe has just said. Of course I do. And I think one of the keys in the West, and I certainly see this in the States, maybe more than anywhere else in the world, is embracing the fact that science does not have all the answers. You know, science is good, and I believe in science, I believe in the scientific method. But science is designed to be constantly updated with new information as it comes about. And that's where science has gotten stuck. And I have spoken at scientific organizations where that message wasn't received very well. I can do it because I'm a trained geologist, so I can talk about this. Science is designed to be constantly updated, and what's happening right now is that science has been hijacked by politics, by corporations that are using science or some version of an outdated science to convince people or to keep people in the fear of a reality that really no longer exists. I'm going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow as well. Tomorrow for me is a very visual program, and it's actually, for both Joe and I, it's a little unusual for us to be sitting in a chair. We're usually in constant motion across this stage, as I will be tomorrow. But the whole idea, we have been immersed in a story about us and ourselves that helps us to feel separate from our bodies, separate from the world, separate from one another. So when the world changes, we're fearful, and we feel like we need to go to somebody else for the information. So that the whole paradigm that is shifting now, I'm just going to give you an example. Somebody asked me just in the hall, they said, Gregg, if this is true, if the science is changing, why isn't it being taught in the classrooms? Why isn't it being taught in the textbooks, in the medical schools? And I've asked my colleagues in the universities the same question. So I'm just going to share with you one conversation I had with a friend of mine who is involved with teaching evolution at a big university in California. Darwin's idea of evolution. Even though the fossil record no longer supports Darwin's idea when it comes to us. Evolution is a fact, but when it comes to humans, the theory breaks down. Something happened to us. We appeared on this earth 200,000 years ago, and if you take a fossil of us then and you compare it to us now, we haven't changed in 200,000 years. That's not Darwin's idea of evolution. So if we really want to answer the question, who are we? What are our ultimate capabilities? We need to go back 200,000 years ago and say, what happened? How did we really get here? So I asked my friend who teaches in the university, I said, why won't you share the new science? He said, Gregg, if I shared that new science, it would invalidate my teaching career of 40 years. I said, no. I said, it wouldn't invalidate. I said, think about this. It would demonstrate to your students how powerful science is, because you would share with them what you knew 40 years ago and now share with them the new discoveries now. And he said, well, if I share the new discoveries, think how expensive it would be to change the textbooks. I said, that's no problem because they're becoming obsolete. It's all digital. You change it one place on the computer and everybody has the change. And then he said, it's a habit. He said, for 40 years, I've been teaching this. What about my notes? How do I change my class notes? So it's ego, habit, power, money are keeping us, and that's just one example. They're keeping us, those who believe in those stories, in an old idea of who we are, based in separation. Okay? New discoveries, and these are peer-reviewed scientific discoveries. Y'all know what peer review? Peer review is when a scientist creates a paper, he circulates it among his peers, and they either find errors in his theory, or they will say, we completely agree with this. It can take years for a paper to go through a peer review process. And when it's accepted, it's called peer review science. That's different than a scientist who works at NASA can write anything and put it up on the internet, and all of a sudden, you're getting it in your Facebook, I'm getting it in my Facebook. Look, NASA scientist makes this claim. Well, he is a scientist, he does work for NASA, but it's not peer-reviewed science. So I'm making that distinction. So here's where we're at with what this conversation is all about tonight. You and I are steeped in a story of separation, competition, and conflict. The world that is breaking down reflects those beliefs. Our society, our nations are trying to solve the problems. The economy, the global economy, is buckling and collapsing because it's unsustainable. That's where it's showing up really fast. The way we solve problems between nations, the Middle East, China, Russia, all of this stuff, it's breaking down because we're trying to do it through these old ideas. The way we heal our bodies are faced with conditions that we didn't have 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I want to tell you, there are places in the world that I go to where Alzheimer's does not exist, where cancers do not exist. And these people are in their 80s, 90s, 100s, 110s, and 120-year-old people. So it's not about age. It's about the way we live. It's about our lifestyle. It's about our belief systems. New discoveries have overturned all of that, and they're telling us that nature is based in a model of cooperation, not competition. So here's what that means. I'm just going to tell you, and then I'll stop. I'm just going to tell you, it's a true life story. My wife is with me at this program. She often doesn't come. Martha, I think you're in the room. She may be in the back of the room. She went to see Stonehenge today, so she got here late. Martha and I live in northern New Mexico. We have a friend of ours who we've known for a long time. He was a builder of beautiful, green, sustainable homes for over 30 years until the year 2008, when the economy collapsed. He lost everything. And when things like that happen, we typically try to recreate what we've known in the past. So he tried to find places to build new, green, sustainable homes, and nobody wanted them in 2008. It was a housing crisis. When he tells the story, he says he woke up from a sound sleep in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning. And as he woke up, he was whispering a question to himself. So his subconscious, or a higher intervention, was working with him. And the question he asked is this. He didn't say, how can I make things better for myself? He said, what do people need? What does my community need right now? What does my family need? That is the pivotal question. Because in the old world of separation, competition, and conflict, you and I have always asked a question before we make a decision, before you make a healthcare decision, or before you enter into a romantic relation, or you accept a job. You always have, in the past, have asked this question, what can I get from this choice? What can I get from this relationship? What can I get from this decision? That makes perfect sense in a world based in separation, but we don't live in that world. So the new question now becomes, what can I give? What can I share? What can I offer? How can I contribute to my family, my community? What do people need? That simple question changes everything, because it goes from thinking about only ourselves to embrace the deepest truths of our connectedness. So my friend did this. Next morning he woke up and he began to design, prototype, and build an innovative system of raised bed, self-watering, self-heating, covered greenhouses. He could build them as small as 12 inches square to go on a high-rise in New York where people have no land, or he could build them as big as 8 feet by 4 feet and string them together in a series out west where people have a lot of land. And he said people need to care for themselves. He began teaching people how to grow their own food. What happened from this? He never had to look back. He is now more successful helping people to do this. In the worst economic downturn in 70 years, he is thriving where the people that are trying to build the houses are out of work. He's healthier because he loves what he's doing. He gets up every morning. He's going to go help people. He likes to meet his friends and his neighbors. He feels good about what he's doing. His stress levels are down, and now he's had to hire more people than he ever hired building homes. And all he did was he changed the question. And that question is at the crux of where we are today. As the systems built in separation collapse, if we try to recreate those old systems, that's where the struggle comes from. If we allow them to collapse and replace them with something new, beautiful, and sustainable, that is where we thrive. And this is the generation that's making that choice. Buckminster Fuller, before he died, I have so much respect for him. He's such a hero for me. He made a statement that I think sums this up beautifully. He said, you'll never change things by fighting what you don't like. He says, if you want to bring about change, find a new way to do something that makes the old way obsolete. And everyone will embrace that new way. You don't have to fight the old. People just stop going there. And that's what we're doing today. We're building a new world based on sustainability and connection. And you're hearing the spiritual principles this weekend and the science that validates some of those. Because when we understand that, then we know what works and what doesn't. We know what to do more of, what to do less of. And we've empowered ourselves, as Joe said. Once you're empowered with the understanding of how something works, you no longer need someone to tell you what to do. And that is really, really a powerful place to be in a time of extremes. So I'm going to stop right there. But I'm going to stop, except I want to say this. I've never been more optimistic about our future, about our world, about the people of this world. And as you heard me say earlier, I'm also a realist. And I'm very realistic about the amount of work that it takes on an inner level to embrace a new reality. And if you've never thought about it before, have you ever thought about what a powerful being it takes to be where you are right this minute? Have you ever thought about that? If you haven't, let me just invite you, do that. Do you know what a powerful being it takes to live in a world where you learned to do things a certain way and you felt that you had mastered that world to a certain degree. And all of a sudden, it's like the rug is pulled out from underneath you in that world, and you're asked to find a new world that's not quite here yet, and not get lost in the fear of the unknown in between. That's where you are right now. And it's because you're in this room this weekend. I'm so honored to be here with you and with Joe and the other speakers on this stage, because we're all in this together. We're exploring this together. We're going to share what we've found to be true so far. And I think by the end of the weekend, we're going to have a really, really powerful model to support the optimism that all the speakers have where we're going, because we're building a new world and we're building new bodies to get there. I don't know what could be more exciting. So with that, I'm going to close this part. Thank you.
So we've got another 3 hours left to get through these, so we'll be fine. Okay. Thank you for the amazing, amazing answers. Here's a question which I think is relevant. It's come from the audience. Kind of surprising, but I think it's relevant as well. It says, I have been hearing and reading about the change in human evolution and consciousness that is about to take place for many years, meaning he's been hearing it for many years. Out in the real world, I see no evidence of this. The way people are and the way the world is can make me feel despondent and hopeless. When are we going to see a real positive change amongst everyday people?
I took the last one first. Would you like to take this one first?
I actually disagree with that. I actually have the opportunity to travel around the world, and while I'm working with more of a select group of people, but I have witnessed such a shift in consciousness in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, when I was invited, imagine 1999, when I was invited to do talks in the United States or different parts of the world, that people would just be like, I'm going to go get my crystal out, or, okay, just something, they were putting their power in something else. And now people are so informed, and people are so willing. When you look in an airport or when you look in a city and you see people busy doing their thing, they're just running a program. I assert that if we're not in the present moment, that 95% of the time we're running a program. So don't take any of that personally. That's just a program that we have that we just run. But when you get right down to it and you have an opportunity to interact with people, their values have shifted dramatically. There's not such a need for materialism that there was even 10 years ago. People want meaning. They want to understand things better. They want connection. They want to be able to monitor their creations. They want to have the mystical experience. They find a value now in nature. Now, there's a whole intellectual division that's going on where people are still clinging to the old paradigms. And, for years, I used to think that I had to speak to both of those groups. And all of a sudden, about 2 years ago, I just no longer am interested in that other group. I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in the people that want to hear it. And I think if there's enough of momentum or movement in that direction, more and more people will continue to change their ways. But for me, I've been very observant in watching people. And I can look out in this audience and I can tell you that this is a great representation of awareness right here. And this is a great representation of people wanting to know and people who are informed. But the question that I have for every single one of you is on Sunday or on Monday when you leave here, what are you going to do with it? And how are you going to apply these principles to your life? And so if you're not demonstrating that in your own life, then you're observing everything and everybody else that you still are. But if you have the opportunity every single day to be a work in progress, to retreat from your life just a small amount of time, and sit down before you start your day and decide who you're going to present to the world that day. And if you can combine the concepts of quantum physics and neuroplasticity and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics and all these different idealisms into one model, and you are the expression of that, and you're able to maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day, you better get ready, because something unusual is going to happen in your life. It's the law. And so then if you're willing to take your attention off of everybody else for a period of time, and the brain's job is to create meaning between what's going on out there and what's going on in here. And if you have the ability to move back and forth between those two states with a certain amount of elegance and not give your power to anyone or anything, and you're able to sustain that, you will begin to attract conditions in your life equal to who you're being in that moment. So I say that it is happening. I say that it is happening individual per individual. And I would say that as people begin to wake up and they begin to demonstrate those changes, you will begin to see small pockets of consciousness beginning to show up in different parts of the world, where people are really beginning to, as Gregg said, no longer invest their energy into old paradigms. A new paradigm has been created, and they just leave that old paradigm behind. Well, I have witnessed it enough times just in seeing people heal themselves. I have witnessed it in being invited to companies and organizations all over the world. And 10 years ago, I would sit down and go through all this neuroscience, and I walk in and they raise their hand and they say, "When are we going to meditate?" This is Sony Entertainment in New York City. They're closing $50 million deals with Beyonce, and they're no BS people, but they want to know how to make themselves more balanced and more whole. So the conversation is shifting. And, after 2012, everybody said, "Oh, the end of the world, beginning of a new consciousness." How come it isn't here? Well, it is here. When you went to your Holy Communion or your Bar Mitzvah, the moment your rite of passage, if you're a native, after that rite of passage, the next day you didn't grow up and you were an adult. It took time. It took time for you to grow up, and this is the process of growing up. We're in this acceleration. We're in this process. And the energy, by the way, is heightened for a very specific reason, to make us so uncomfortable that we have to do something. We have to act. We have to move in some way. But the movement that we have to make has to be more fraternal, more brotherly, more sisterly. There's got to be a connection that we have to demonstrate. And I think if we demonstrate that, I think people start resonating with it, and it happens. But it is happening, absolutely happening in my world.
Yes, I agree. I agree, and I think a lot of it is just how we look at the world. What lens do we choose to see the world through? In my lifetime, I've had the honor and the privilege. I've met a couple of presidents. I have known many religious, very high-level religious figures, political leaders, social architects, scientists, engineers, indigenous elders from all over the world. And every one of them, in their way, has said to me, "Gregg, we knew this change was coming." They've been telling us, the indigenous people, for thousands of years. Others have known. They all knew that a change, a shift is coming. And every one of those people, down to the last one, has told me they are absolutely blown away by how fast the shift is happening. No one ever thought it was going to happen so quickly. Now, when it comes to the way that people change, I think in the New Thought, New Age movement, there was a belief that was instilled back in the 1980s during the harmonic convergence. Y'all remember the harmonic convergence? You remember that? Who doesn't know about the harmonic convergence? That was a time on the Mayan calendar. Jose Arguelles identified it. I want to tell you how naive I was. I didn't know about it. I was an engineer working in the defense industry. And the first time I heard somebody ask about the harmonic convergence, I thought they were talking about a rock group that was coming to Denver, Colorado, called the Harmonica Virgins. If you say it really fast, it sounds like that, So I had no idea what it was, but that was a time in alignment on the Mayan calendar that preceded 2012. And everybody said, okay, everything's going to change after that. And then 2012, everybody said, okay, everything's going to change after that. I think there was an idea that was instilled that all of a sudden this change, we would wake up in the morning or maybe before we went to bed some night, and everything was going to shift. And what I'm seeing happening, is that possible? Yes, it's possible. Is it realistic? Probably not. I think what's happening is people are changing in response to certain things in their lives that challenge them. That's when they make the individual change. I'll tell you, a perfect example is the last couple of weeks. Have you watching the economic system of the world go through some big shifts? Have you all seen that? People that have never bought into anything going on at all, what they've said is something is up, something's going on, because it affected them in a way that they could not ignore. But it's not just about the economy. It's about people's healthcare decisions. It's about sustainability. But what I'm seeing, when you see the kind of television program, for example, that you see now that used to be relegated to a few special channels or the occult section of a bookstore 20 years ago, and now it's mainstream television, 2020, or BBC Investigates or something like that. There's a shift when those kinds of things become mainstream, when these conversations become mainstream. And I'm just going to take a guess, but you look at this audience, there's a really nice mix of male and females in this audience. Remember, 20 years ago, it was primarily female that were coming because women typically in the past have been more open to new ideas. They're more open to ideas of intuition and healing from the heart. So those are all shifts that tell me there is something happening, and I am seeing a tremendous shift. Where I'm seeing it most is in the general population like this. Where I'm seeing it the least is in the leadership of our nations. However, I am seeing that change as well. Have you all heard of the very well-known, highly influential meeting in Davos, Switzerland, that happens every year?
Yep.
Where the financial people, the industrial people, they all come together and kind of lay out a blueprint for where the world's going. One of them made a very, very amazing statement last year and said the way we have been thinking in these meetings is no longer sustainable. They said, for us to find the resilience, and that was the word they used, the resilience to help and lead our nations through this time of change, we've got to change the way we're thinking in the way that we have never done before. And that tells me, at least on some levels, that awareness shift is actually percolating into those very high levels as well. I think it has to, because we're all in this together. So I think Joe and I are saying we are optimistic. We do see a shift in the awareness, and it's coming about sometimes in ways that you don't always expect.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm gonna put some quick fire questions to you individually, so separately, not trying to separate you guys, but separate questions. So we can go through a couple more questions. Gregg, starting off with you. What is the purpose of the Hadron Collider? How dangerous is it? And can human consciousness have any effect on it?
That's 3 questions.
What's the purpose of the Hadron Collider?
So, no,
you didn't hear the rest.
Those 3 questions, if I'm understanding the question correctly, physicists throughout the world are struggling to build a new story of you, me, our creation, and the beginning of our universe, because the old story is no longer working. We have been struggling now. Science is about 300 years old. Science for 300 years has been struggling to come up with what is called a unified field theory. Have you all heard of that before? It's a theory that unifies the old physics, the new physics. It's a story in mathematic terms that is about us, how the universe began and where we fit in. And they have yet to find that story. They cannot find that unified field because the thinking of the way, the 2 levels of physics, is incomplete. And the piece that they've left out is consciousness. Traditionally, scientists have been reluctant or resistant to include consciousness in the unified field theory. John Wheeler, Professor John Wheeler, Princeton University, just died a few years ago. He died in 2008, so it's been more than a few years now. He was a colleague of Albert Einstein's, and he was one of the last bright lights in the world of physics that was a proponent of consciousness being a fundamental force in the universe. And what he said, this is so elegant, what he said, we will never find the smallest particle of matter, and we will never find the edge of the universe. We keep sending space probes out, and they go further and further, and every time the scientists say, oh, I think we found the edge of the universe, and they look, and there's something else there. And every time they bang these quantum particles together at the speed of light, and they shatter them into these tiny, tiny fundamental pieces, looking for the smallest piece of matter, and they think they've got it. They look, and then there's something even smaller. John Wheeler said it will always be that way, and here's the reason why, and it's exactly what Joe has just said. He said it is the act of consciousness looking at itself that is a creative act in and of itself. The act of looking for a smaller particle will promise that we always create something for us to see, no matter how small it gets. The act of looking for the edge of the universe promises no matter how far out we go, the act of us looking will create something for us to put there. Consciousness is what's missing in those fundamental forces. So, the Hadron Collider, or CERN, you all know about the CERN Collider. What they are doing is attempting in the laboratory to recreate the moment, the instant that the universe began, by colliding these quantum particles together at the speed of light. There's a 7-mile tube going one direction under the ground and a 7-mile tube going the other direction, and each tube, they begin to accelerate a quantum particle until it's reaching the speed of light, and they're going in opposite directions, and at just the right instant, they collide them together to recreate those first moments so that they can see what those fundamental laws are all about. Until they acknowledge the role of consciousness in that moment, that instant, I think we're going to come up short with this fundamental story, this story of creation. If we've been looking for 300 years using the best minds, the best equipment, the most money from government funding, and we haven't found it in 300 years, doesn't that tell you maybe we're not on the right track? That's what it says to me. They just keep building bigger and bigger machines that are going to collide these things faster. We're learning a lot, but it's not telling them what they want to know because they've left that part out. And the part they're leaving out, that's where this is interesting, is quantum experiments have shown that the particles behave one way when nobody's looking, and they behave another way when someone is looking. To see a bunch of French and Swiss scientists watching this fundamental moment of creation, the question is, how much effect is it really having? So I don't think it's going to tell them what they're looking for. They're looking for the Higgs boson, the God particle. There are great songs written about the Higgs boson. I think they're going to be writing a lot more because I don't think that's where the answer is going to be.
So it's a waste of money, basically.
No, it's not a waste of money because it's telling us where we're wrong.
Right.
It's telling us what doesn't work. And we're learning a lot about the universe in the process of doing it. And you know, one of the interesting, it was the last piece, one of the interesting things is they are creating black holes in the process. And the question is, if you create a black hole in the laboratory, how far does it go? How long does it last? And what does it consume? Okay, there was a very similar question when we did the first nuclear chain reaction in Chicago, of all places, in the middle of America. When they had the first controlled chain reaction, they said, can we stop this thing? Or is it just going to keep going and going until there's a mushroom cloud over Chicago? Here's the answer. They said, well, on paper, we should be okay. They're saying the same thing about the collider. They're saying, is a black hole dangerous to create? Well, on paper, you know, it looks like it's pretty safe. I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We'll make this the last question. We've got to do some interviews and answer all these questions.
Sure,
I think
sure.
we're going to organize that online. So untangledfm.com. It's free. Joe, this is a great question. I love this one. This is for you. What is the difference, if any, between learning to reparent the conditional damaged child aspect through compassion and understanding and stepping into pure consciousness and rewiring our brain through meditation?
What was the first part of that? Oh, parenting.
Yeah, so reparent the conditional, so inner child, healing the inner child.
Healing the inner child.
That's what it's saying.
Not talking about children, though.
Yeah, no, not talking about children. And then what's the difference between that through compassion and understanding versus stepping into pure consciousness and rewiring the brain through meditation?
Okay. children, when we're developing, the first 2 years of a child's life, their brainwaves are basically in delta. So they're asleep with their eyes open. And as they begin to interact with their environment, their brainwaves change to theta. And theta is kind of like that twilight state where you have mystical experiences. But the first 6 years of a child's life, they're completely in their subconscious mind because that's what those brainwave patterns do. And as a result of it, all of their attention is on their inner world of feelings. So they have experiences that happen to them. And when the experience happens, they pay attention to their feelings. That's the primary modus for them. And then when they feel altered, they begin to look through their senses outside of them to see who or what caused it. And that event in and of itself is called an associative memory. So for the first 6, 7, 8, 9 years of our lives, as our brainwaves move into alpha and then ultimately into beta, when we get to beta, we're pretty much developed an analytical mind. And the analytical mind then serves as a filter or a barrier to separate the conscious mind from the subconscious mind. But that experience, though, is encoded in a memory system called an implicit memory system. It's stored in our subconscious. So then we don't know why we behave the way we do the rest of our lives because of events that have happened to us, but we're operating at a very fundamental level equal to the emotion that we've experienced. Another way to say that is, the moment you get in situations that bring up similar emotions that have branded you from the past, you return back to that 7-year-old child. And you behave in very, very limited ways because that's all you know, right? No one ever instructed you how to learn and to grow. So then people do all these psychoanalysis and they all these different types of therapies, and a lot of times it never gets to the core of it because they never get beyond their analytical mind to make those changes. Does that make sense? So there are techniques and ways to begin to lower the volume of those emotions that literally are stored in that system. And as you begin to lower the volume of those emotions within that system, you begin to restore the system, and the end product is called wisdom, because a memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom, and that's how we grow and learn. Now, in the work that we've done over and over and over again, that most people, what they do is they have an emotional situation that happens in their life. Emotions are a record of the past. They analyze and think within that emotion, so they're thinking in the past. Are you with me? And when we studied their brain waves and we studied their brain functionally, when they're doing that, their brain always gets worse. Their brain gets more out of balance because it's the very hormones of stress that begin to super arouse or cause the brain to become so aroused, heightened. And when the brain is heightened, as I'll talk about this weekend, when you're facing a threat or something in your life that's potentially dangerous, the moment that happens, you begin to anchor consciousness in the body. You become very aware of your body because there's danger out there. You become super aware of objects and things in your environment because there's something dangerous out there. And you begin to obsess about time. And now when you do that, your brainwaves change and all of your attention goes on the outer world because that's where the danger is. Does that make sense? So 70% of the time, people stay in this state. That's a scientific fact. So then, when we've studied people in altered states, we saw that when they're analyzing their life, what do I do? Should I do this? Should I do that? Within the emotion of whatever it is that keeps them anchored to the past, they never really produce a change. But we've seen, without a doubt, over and over again, that when a person goes into an altered state, when they go within, and they become nobody, no one, no thing, no where, in no time. That's the moment they become pure consciousness. That's the moment they're no longer associating in this space and time, and they just walk through the door to the quantum field. Now, that means that in order for you to change your body, if you have a disease, you got to get beyond your body. In order for you to change some aspect of your personality, you got to get beyond the personality and its program. You got to get beyond the someone. If you are going to create something or change something in your life, you got to get beyond your association to known things and places in your life. And if you are going to create some novel event in some future time, you got to get beyond the anticipation of the future based on the past. And when people actually do that, when they are pure consciousness, that's the moment the brain literally can change in a matter of seconds, because now the operator is no longer immersed in matter. The operator now is beginning to manipulate matter from a different level of mind. And so people can heal their inner child by doing their inner child work, by overcoming emotions, and it requires a certain amount of consciousness and awareness. It requires a certain amount of metacognition or mindfulness to observe who they're being and begin to modify their behaviors and create new experiences and begin to overcome some of those emotions that keep them anchored to the past. But in order to do it in a very quick way, we've seen this over and over again, that people have to get beyond their body, their environment, and time. That's when they all of a sudden, consciousness becomes the epiphenomenon of matter, and a person can have an instantaneous experience that changes them because they're now already in the operating system. And I'll show you some brain scans that will probably floor most of you, because these are not nuns, these are not Buddhist monks, these are not academics, these are not Kabbalistic rabbis. These are common people just like you doing an uncommon thing. And the amount of energy that we're capturing in their brain we have never seen in a scientific experiment to date, which means that person is having a full-on inner experience that's transcendent of any past experience. They're having such a transcendent moment that the experience in that moment is reorganizing the circuitry in their brain, and the end product of the experience is called an emotion. They're feeling awe and wonder and love and joy, and they're signaling new genes in new ways, and that's the moment the past is literally washed out of the body. And we've seen tumors change, we've seen uterine fibroids go away, we've seen anxiety, depression, we've seen MS, lupus, we've seen it change in one instant when the person literally connects that deeply to the power within them. And that's the moment that the rewiring process can happen instantaneously. Now, that doesn't always happen that way. Other times, you got to stay at it. People who have done our work have done their meditations for 3 years. It took them 3 years to heal their condition. But you know what? They wanted that healing more than their sleep. They wanted that healing more than their social engagements. They wanted that healing more than their morning coffee. They wanted that more than anything else. And they wanted to connect with the divine every single day, and they wanted to drink from a deeper well, and they said, I don't want breakfast, I don't want coffee, I don't want my cell phone, I don't want my internet, I want you, power within me. We have a date, and I am going to commune with you, and I'm going to connect with you, and there's nothing else that matters more in this moment than that. And every day they overcame a little aspect of themselves, surrendered a piece of the limited self to join the greater self. And sure, it was hard, and sure they had doubts, and sure they were uncertain, and sure they didn't feel like it certain days because they were facing a very serious condition. But every day they did it. And after a period of 3 years, and they overcame that disease or that condition or whatever, you ask that person, what about that condition or disease? They'll tell you, it was my greatest teacher. What about your father who was an alcoholic and was abusive? That was my greatest lesson. Because what if you think about your father now? Do you have any charge? No. And I'd say, well, now you have wisdom, because the memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. And if the soul's job is to embrace the unknown and create new experiences, if we're living by the same emotions, addicted to those emotions every day, how can the soul go on an adventure into the future if it is stuck emotionally to the past? So then positive thinking doesn't work if the person is literally anchored to the past emotionally. And so when people begin to open their hearts, and Gregg will talk about this and I'll talk about it, and we've got enormous amount of data to show how powerful you are and how connected you are to the person on the other side of the room when you open your heart, how it affects that person. We've measured this. that you are bound in an invisible field beyond space and time, but not when you're feeling anxious, not when you're feeling angry, not when you're feeling frustrated, not when you're judgmental. You're not doing that. You're actually drawing from the field around your body and turning it into chemistry, and your field shrinks. But when you open your heart and you begin to breathe through that center and it's safe to open up, the field around your body can be 9 meters wide. That's science now. Now you're more energy and less matter. And that non-local phenomenon begins to have an effect on everybody that you've ever interacted with. So then, we know that when people begin to unmemorize those emotional states and they lower the volume to them, the emotion is what's signaling the gene in the wrong way. And if the emotion is a record of the past, the moment the person overcomes that emotion, they're free now to create a new future. And according to the religious model, they're born again in the same life.